My father was a tireless advocate for the law. He was a criminal prosecutor. Some say ruthless, others say righteous. Yeah, I'm cut from the same cloth. I can't really remember who I was before I became a cop. It's my job to make bad things happen to bad people.
An open letter to the man who murdered my child. As a mother, I am suffering because I've lost my dearly loved daughter. He killed my gentle child.
Toronto was a dangerous place for Margaret, but she was not streetwise.
Warden Woods Park was not a place to be.
It was wild and foreboding, where horrible things could happen.
Why didn't we warn her?
Police found the body of 21-year-old Margaret McWilliam in Warden Woods Park August 28.
At first, it was terrible. I would wake up and think I had seen Margaret, or Margaret was talking to me. And I had nightmares as I would scream.
It's 26 years, and they still haven't found the person who murdered our daughter. That's Margaret, as she was when she was murdered.
How old was she here?
She was 21.
People can be so courageous and so resilient. I can't even imagine going on with my life if somebody murdered my child. There's nothing that could be as bad.
It's important to meet the family to get their blessing to go forward with reopening this case and to remind us of the person behind this story. Well, the more I hear about Margaret's case, the more I'm convinced that it was and still is solvable.
I hope it can be, because I'm running out of years. I would really like to know.
Margaret is frozen at 21. For her sake, we have to do everything that we can to find out who took her away.
Ivan and Charlotte's cause are, I think, why cold cases fascinate people and why they demand answers and closure years later. This, to me, epitomizes the value of a cold case squad.
I've been a cop and a professor of criminology for years, and I've used that experience to assemble a squad of civilian subject matter experts.
They must approach each case completely unbiased, to not box themselves into conventional thinking, to bring fresh eyes and new technologies to the table.
Their job, and mine, is to investigate the coldest of cold cases, the murders that time forgot.
Today's case. Margaret Louise McWilliam, murdered August 27th, 1987, at age 21. Original case file 1987-36. It's the 36th homicide in the city of Toronto in 1987. The facts are as follows. August 27th, 1987, sometime in the early evening, she leaves her modest basement apartment in Scarborough. She went jogging in Warden Woods Park. She never returned. Somewhere along the path in that park, she met her attacker. When she failed to show up for work for her next shift, her boss called police. This was not in keeping with her behavior. A full-scale search of the park was undertaken, and Police cadaver dogs later located Margaret's body in this vicinity. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with a piece of her own clothing, an item torn from her jogging suit.
Was any assailant DNA recovered from the scene?
That's what we're going to have to determine.
And what about the condition of her body? Would you say it was a brutal assault?
The injuries and trauma to the body are consistent with someone being ambushed. All evidence points to this being a brutal attack. There is no other crime more injurious to a community and to just what it is to be human than to kill another human being.
It's certainly shocking to review the details of the case, with the method of killing described in such grisly detail.
The idea here is to not mimic what the police have done. The idea is to start anew. I'm interested in your insights. You all have 6 weeks with which to figure out why this case went cold and reinvigorate it.
What do we know about any other sexual assaults that had occurred in the area?
At the time, there was no sexual offender registry. That's going to be one of the things that you're going to have to look into.
As far as tips go, was there a lot?
The tips did generate one solid lead. The creation of this composite drawing. They are a person of interest who could be a witness or a suspect. This composite was created following tips from the public about a man seen leaving Warden Woods Park at or about the time that Margaret is believed to have been killed. Composite sketches can be very helpful in an investigation. That said, they're not without their problems. They're frequently drawn from different eyewitnesses and then interpreted by the artist. Often those eyewitness versions are also contaminated by their own existing prejudices or biases.
So is there any trace or impression evidence found at the scene that would allow us to cross-reference with this individual or other persons of interest?
Indeed there is. There was a patent shoe print left at the scene. We know the make, we know the style of shoe. What we don't have is the person to link the unique or individual characteristics of this shoe. It's a bit of a test for their ability to differentiate between important probative evidence, as we say, and what we call the red herrings or the distractors. So this is a rite of passage for them as much as it is an indicator for me of who's going to lead this squad and rise to the task. This plea from Charlotte McWilliam, Margaret's mother, is more real today than ever.
As a mother, I'm suffering because I've lost my dearly loved daughter. He killed my gentle child. She did him no wrong. I don't think my pain will ever go away.
It is a parent's worst nightmare. It definitely affects you at a personal level.
You want to bring a sense of peace almost to the family because they've been suffering because it's been so long, 26, 27, some odd years.
There's this feeling that I need to make sure we take care of them. Want to make sure that we're being respectful at all times when we talk about the families and make sure that we honor the victim.
We really need to investigate with fresh eyes, using new perspectives. See if we can get closer today to capturing this killer who has eluded authorities for over 26 years. Let's talk about initial investigative action items in this case and who's going to do what.
I'm most interested in the shoe print, how deep it was, if you can infer body height, body mass.
Put that in as action item number 1.
I want to look at the other cases that happened in 1987 to see if there's any kind of correlation to this one.
Here's a term you may not have heard before, microfiche. Antonella?
What kind of person did this? Do we have a psychological profile?
We know something about how they dress. We have the shoe impression. There's some additional facts that you can get just from the shoe alone. Monty?
Who was in the neighborhood that was maybe sexual offenders, known creeps? Try and get a feel for the neighborhood by talking to people who lived there. The first thing that came to mind was Paul Bernardo. He was very active at that time in Scarborough.
The The MO is actually very similar. He would wait and beset victims and then attack them at random. This could have been one of his earlier crimes, and it would be very logical to want to include him.
Now I'm going to look into Paul Bernardo, see where he was at the time of Margaret's murder, and see if there's a connection.
Wasn't Colonel Russell Williams around Scarborough at that time?
Actually, he was. He attended U of T Scarborough campus that same year.
Yeah.
Colonel Russell Williams, also known as the Killer Colonel, was the commander in charge of Canadian Forces Base Trenton up until 2009, when he was arrested, charged, and convicted of numerous offenses, including a number of bizarre sexual offenses and ultimately 2 counts of first-degree murder. Williams started as a peeping Tom and a fetish B&E artist, but at least that we know of, didn't escalate to crimes of the magnitude of Margaret's murder until much later. I don't see a connection there. It's highly unlikely that he's our guy. We need to focus on more viable suspects.
I met the family over the weekend. I feel like I owe it to them to work quickly. I can't be too shy, I can't hold back.
When you think of any mother or any family missing their child or their brother or sister, it's impossible to imagine.
I've always wanted to help people. Someone has to stand up, and some people either are unable or they're just afraid, and I'm not afraid.
I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't some inherent element of danger to all of this. People might be hostile. Each person is free to help out other people. You can work as a team. So let's say 72 hours before we meet back for, at the very least, a progress report. You all have your assignments, you all have your investigative action items. Let's get out there and let's start thawing this case out.
Police found the body of 21-year-old Margaret McWilliam in Warden Woods Park August 28th.
One of the key challenges in catching Margaret's killer is the fact that there are no known suspects. We're starting from ground zero. Right now, I've got Antonella meeting with a forensic psychologist to help build a psychological profile of this killer.
When I looked at the details of Margaret McWilliam, her murder, it was brutal, it was violent, it was vicious. Maybe we can get a picture of the kind of person, like where would they live? Would they be a transient? Those are all very important features that we need to look at in order to determine the individual that would do something like that. What characteristics would a person like that have, would you say?
Certainly not an easy case because there's not that much information available. I saw a number of crime scene behaviors that I thought related to certain level of impulsivity, which is certainly a good discriminator in terms of looking at rapists and sexual murderers. It's definitely a medium to high risk location. Someone could come by, someone could hear the victim. This way of life this person has is gonna filter out into other things. So keeping a steady job is gonna be difficult. He's gonna get in fights with his other colleagues and stuff at work. There's probably not that much involved in the world that you and I walk around in.
To know that Margaret's killer was impulsive and a risk taker tells me a lot. This is somebody who probably thought they were above the law. Somebody who may have a long record of criminal activity, and this person may have murdered before. What would you say his state of mind would have been at the time? Because we know that from the evidence, we know that he punched Margaret in the face.
So punching her in the face was probably because she was struggling. If you struggle, I'm going to hit you in the face. And it's very nonchalant. Offender will justify it in that way.
Based on what you know about this particular person, they may have crossed paths.
In criminology, we have a theory called routine activity theory, which relates to people movement around their geographical space. We all follow routines. We don't deviate from them very often. So there's something about this area that this offender was in it for some reason.
Geographic profiling is a great tool to help us determine what type of offender we're dealing with in relation to where the crime occurred.
He likes to search for victims. It's frequented by young girls jogging at that particular time.
In Margaret's case, I think we're looking at either a hunter or a troller. Has either targeted her specifically or targeted users of that path specifically.
So, yeah, it's a good chance that he knew that area, that he was familiar with that park.
This is really significant. To find out that Margaret's killer likely lived in the same area that he killed her in will do a lot to help us focus this investigation.
The location of this murder is going to be critical in helping solve this puzzle. It's key that we get as much information about Warden Woods Park as possible.
I'm going to try to locate the scene of the crime from 1987 when Margaret was attacked here, so that we can develop a better idea of whether the perpetrator was familiar with this area, to what extent was this a crime of opportunity, what kinds of places there were for a perpetrator to conceal himself prior to the attack, and during the crime if there were other people using the park. So these 3 trees are the trees that are in this photograph from 1987. Hopefully I'll be able to calculate with more precision from the photographs where Margaret was dragged off of this path into the woods behind us. It likely would have been easier to drag her into the ravine, but based on these photographs, there was very little cover to be able to conceal the crime. When I'm analyzing a crime scene or dealing with a case, I try not to put myself in the mindset of the victim, so that I can stay as objective and scientific as possible. But knowing what I know about Margaret in this case, she probably came to Warden Woods Park because she thought it would give her a taste of the country, being isolated from busy roads. But this is really a dangerous area. It's very sad and frightening to know that really horrible people took advantage. This crime scene suggests to me that we're dealing with a hunter type of offender. There are features of this park that have been deliberately taken advantage of, and the perpetrator would have had to know this area intimately to take advantage of those features. I'm going to text Peter these coordinates so he can get to this exact location for his investigation.
Daniel, let's go.
Got it.
Now that we have the exact location, we'll be able to determine the depth of this foot impression, and this will allow us to calculate the offender's height and weight.
One of my strengths is that having lived in the city for a long time, I've got a list of contacts and friends who know friends and people I've come across over so many years. And it helps me quite often in my PI work. Perhaps a person of interest, perhaps, used to hang around here. This was 1987. Now I'm trying to track down anyone in the area that may have a connection to Margaret's case. Bernardo, he's a possible suspect. I want to know if I could rule him in, rule him out. About the 4th or 5th place I went to, this customer told me about someone that used to work there who was assaulted and raped in 1984. I want to talk to her and see if the details match the attack on Margaret. So did you know this perpetrator?
I met him that day through some friends.
Right.
He was kind of coming on me a little strong.
Did he beat you up at all or hit you at any time? Or?
Threatened me, told me he had a knife.
Oh, okay.
He would use it, but he didn't want to. If I just would comply, then as long as things went his way, everything would be okay.
It can be difficult interviewing about delicate things of this nature, the sexual assault. The memories come flooding back to them, and I could see the emotion. And so was there any strangling or choking or anything like that?
Yeah, he did at one point grab me by the throat, and there was. After that incident, I never saw him again at all.
I really thought I was onto something with Lisa there, but the MOs, they don't match. Margaret didn't know her attacker. Lisa, she was introduced to hers, so I'm just gonna have to keep digging.
I'd like to look at the relationship between foot impression depth and body weight over that surface area. Coming from a physics background, I was very interested in getting more details about that shoe print, because that's one of the few hard pieces of evidence we know. I want to conduct a biometric test. If we can determine the depth of that impression, then combined with its length, we will be able to infer the height and weight of the killer. somehow figure out where these footprints were found. You know, were they found down there? Were they found on the path?
How close to the body?
The soil character does change. No matter how finely we could measure a depth in this soil, we have no way of knowing if it was here versus anywhere else, so. Unfortunately, when we arrived on scene, we were unable to determine where these footprints might have been, and so this experiment is a non-event. As a civilian with an academic background, this kind of on-the-ground active investigation presents a whole new type of challenge for me, and I'm gonna have to think very hard how I pursue it and how I proceed with my next steps.
Got a guy we might want to take a look at here. This guy is nasty, nasty piece of work. Suspected of and been convicted of several violent rapes. Escaped from prison in Connecticut, headed up to Toronto 5 days before Margaret's murder. Somewhat fits the MO, possible person of interest. I've got to go canvass the neighborhood of Warden Woods anyways. So while I'm out there, I'll ask around. It might jog memory, especially if we can show them a photo of it.
Right, it gets them reinvested. This guy is definitely worth looking at. He's a fugitive sexual deviant, very sadistic, on the run from the law. We know he might have been in the area at the time.
It's 25 years ago. You've got to start somewhere.
If there's a connection to Margaret's murder, we need to find out now. For the first few weeks of this investigation, I gave my civilian squad free rein to come at Margaret McWilliam's unsolved murder in their own way, with fresh eyes and using their specific areas of expertise. Now I'll see if I need to tighten that rein. Welcome back. I'm very curious to hear what everyone's come up with so far. Antonella, can we start with you?
Sure. I met with the forensic psychologist at Ryerson, Dr. Alistair Goodwill. He thinks it was probably somebody that was familiar with Warden Woods Park. He said this person was probably known to police and probably had a criminal record based on things other than sexual offenses.
Sexual offenders frequently begin as peeping Toms. Once that fails to satisfy their deviant sort of impulses, then they escalate their crimes from there. All right. Next group.
We traveled to Warden Woods Park. Unfortunately, once we arrived, we were unable to locate where the killer's footprints might have been, so this experiment was a washout.
Peter needs to not forget that he serves a valuable role on this team. I need to see him elevate his confidence level. Peter, what I need you to do now is to create a geographical map. Identify and plot in all known murders and sexual assaults in Warden Woods, not just in the park, but in the surrounding area. Right? I need you to account for commonalities in terms of MO, victimology, all the data points that will allow us to make violent crime linkage analyses. I need them to be as accurate as possible. Dania, you continue your search on similar crimes over that 10-year period to allow Peter to build his interactive map. Antonella, you're meeting with the fashion historian. That's going to complement the forensic psychological profile that you've already got.
We have the hat from the composite sketch, and we have the shoe evidence still to look into. The question is, could they have been from the same person?
Monte, I need you to simultaneously look into both and Paul Bernardo. See if you can exclude one or both, or leave in one or both. Either way, pursue it further. We're dealing with a very compressed timeline. Let's get this done.
I was working on an angle, wondering, if Paul Bernardo was around. A little bird told me that he was out of the country at the time. Would you happen to know that? I was speaking there to a retired police officer that I know. He said, I can confirm it because I worked side by side with one of the lead detectives on that case. Bernardo was not in the country. So now I can move forward, and that's the end of that.
This tread pattern is distinctive to this topless shoe. There's no other shoe like this with that tread pattern.
I'm here to talk to Dr. Allison Matthews-David, who is a fashion historian, to show her the shoe print that was found at the scene and also composite drawing, to talk to her about whether or not she can speculate as to the type of person that may have been involved in this murder. The case we're investigating, it's a murder that happened in 1987. What we have is one piece of evidence. It's a shoe print that we have that I'd like to show you. Okay. And also, we have a composite drawing of a person of interest. And I was wondering if you can give me an idea of what you think.
In 1986, the Air Jordan 2 was released, and that was the first luxury sneaker. Cost $100. This shoe is a knockoff of that. Okay. Because not everyone could afford the actual Nike Air Jordan 2. But it has very similar detailing. It's got a similar sole print from what you showed me.
Okay, so it would have been someone that might have been aware of the Air Jordan 2 and would have been interested in possibly having something very similar, right?
Totally. It suggests someone who is really in touch with the trends, but without paying the price tag for it.
Okay. What is it that you think you can tell us about the person that might be wearing this cap?
In the 1980s, it would have been worn by probably a fan of hip-hop. It was an older style that got recycled by the hip-hop movement.
Okay. Anything in terms of the socioeconomic background of a person that might be wearing this type of hat?
There are suburban white kids imitating hip-hop, but it was still very much a kind of African-American culture.
Could it have been possible that this was the same person that wore the shoes that was in the composite drawing?
The hat is very much a marker of that hip-hop culture, whereas the shoe, it's a bit more generic and could have been any young man.
The hat was likely worn by someone interested in a particular culture, but the shoes could have been bought by anyone. We need to keep an open mind at this point.
Now that Bernardo's been excluded from the investigation, I've been focusing on finally I was able to track someone down who knew him back in the 80s. What I wanted to ask you about was this man here.
It's Chuck.
You know him as Chuck?
Right.
Okay, his real name is...
We knew the guy as Chuck.
How did you come to know him?
He frequented the bar.
And what was Chuck like?
Well, he's on a hair trigger. He was a troublemaker, but he was hot and cold. He had to be ejected several times.
Did he ever seem close to anyone? Was there anyone he came in with often?
He always was alone.
Did he ever tell you that you recall anything about his background? Maybe he was sitting at the bar?
No, never learned anything about that.
Being a father and looking into a case of this nature, you put yourself in the position where, what if that was my kid? If it comes to you later, perhaps you can give me a call of anyone who might have been close to him somehow. I think I'm really onto something now. I gotta look at more closely.
Right now, I've got access to the original analysis, the behavioral profile of Margaret's killer. I'm looking for all the information I can find with respect to the MO, the signature, or any other elements of the crime scene that will help us link Margaret's killer to any other homicides. Renee, it's Mike. I need everyone back at the squad room right now. I've got access to the original behavioral profile of Margaret's killer. It fundamentally changes the direction of this case and what we're going to do next. I've been able to acquire part of the original crime file. Some of the facts in this case are much more grisly, much more tragic than we initially thought when we undertook this investigation. We know that, yes, Margaret was attacked in Warden Woods Park, on the path. Her clothes showed no signs of soiling. No drag marks, no dirt, no mud. Clothes were arranged neatly in a pile.
The family's just as much as a victim as Margaret was. If we can bring light to this case and actually get it solved, I think we would put a lot of peace back into the family.
Margaret's body was found supine or face up, wearing only her socks.
She was such a kind, honest, moral person who would never hurt anyone. And then to have this happen to her, to such an innocent being, just makes it even worse or even more brutal.
Margaret had been raped from the front. Cause of death was ligature strangulation. The weapon used was actually Margaret's own sweatshirt. It was turned inside out, the sleeve fastened around her throat using what's known as a granny knot. The shoe print recovered at the scene was actually not from the soil, but from an impression of Margaret's body. The offender stood on her and reefed on the sleeve until she was dead. This crime has all of the psychopathic tendencies to suggest whether weeks, months, or even years later, there's no question in my mind that this killer struck again. The question is, where are they now? It's our job to find out. The squad has been looking at as a potential person of interest in Margaret's murder. I need to know if Monty's found any evidence to actually support this theory. What are the circumstances in this other attack that you told me about a month after Margaret's?
It was a 15-year-old girl who was in the area, and he forced her at night point to perform sexual acts on him. He did not strangle nor kill her, so...
Okay. So markedly different in terms of...
Different indeed.
Victim MO for sure, the use of the weapon. Not satisfied that this is the same type of psychopathology, same MO, same signature for sure, based on what you're telling me now. The differences are just too prominent.
As I investigated further, this guy, it just doesn't fit.
We're running out of leads. We're running out of time with both and Bernardo off the table. We're back to square one. We really need a breakthrough.
We're building a geographic profile of the Toronto area, looking for commonalities in sexual homicides over a 20-year period, from 1977, 10 years before Margaret's murder, to 1997, 10 years after. The hope here is that we find a match for Margaret's murder. Danny, these cases you found, this is big data.
There's a lot here.
Yeah, we're not gonna make much sense of this unless we convert these addresses to coordinates, plot them on a map.
Okay, so we're looking at the longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates so we can place that on the map that you've created, is that correct?
That's right. The most important data in our view is the date of each assault, the modus operandi, and our best estimate of a geographic location for this assault.
There is a lot of action going on in Scarborough at this time.
Attempted murders, stabbings, sexual assaults.
It's kind of scary.
Warden Woods is kind of a killing ground. I think I found something. A data point just a few minutes walk from Margaret McWilliam. It's essentially in Warden Woods. Based on what Danny and I have just seen, I'm optimistic that this is going to crack the case open.
The victim, who's in her 30s, was found near Warden Avenue.
The squad is working around the clock to try to solve Margaret's murder. Their own personal lives are being put on hold to get it done, but we've run out of leads. The exception is Peter and Daniel, who are working on a data map of sexual homicides over a 10-year period around Margaret's murder and in the general vicinity of Warden Woods Park. They're looking to find a connection with any other murder and identify the killer.
I think I found something.
The victim, who's in her 30s, was found near Warden Avenue.
All right, home stretch time. Where are we at with Margaret's case?
So if I can just direct your attention to the smartboard. So what we're looking at here is an overview of the GTA. And Warden Woods, so Danny and I looked back in all the archival records and we ruled out all homicides other than sexually motivated attacks on female victims.
Okay.
We've done our best to geolocate each one. If we zoom into Warden Woods now, we see the point representing Margaret McWilliam. And this point here, labeled by the victim name of, we consider our primary hit.
Okay, tell me why.
Strangulation, the rape, the geographic location.
She was found naked. Her clothes and the contents of her purse were found strewn about her naked body.
That was in 1992.
Peter, who was ultimately arrested and convicted for that second offense?
The man responsible for the murder of goes by the name of...
What do we have on him?
Here we've mapped the location where he was living at the time of his arrest at point A. Less than 2 kilometers away was the location of his murder.
It's a diagonal line through the park.
Yeah.
The park itself is the hunting ground. This is very compelling. We just caught a break for the first time in decades. It's very exciting. That's what this is about.
I'm extremely hopeful that what Danny and I have found will crack this case.
Peter's expertise in analysis, computers, all the things that make him a strong asset to this team are really coming to the surface. From here on in, we need to devote all resources to validating this match. Daniel, go to the courthouse, obtain transcripts for conviction for the murder of the secondary victim. Contained in that will be the evidence we need to make a comparison with respect to MO, signature, etc.
Got it. If it turns out that the MO matches Margaret's murder, we're really onto something.
Let's get at it. All right, the court transcripts relating to his murder and his trial. Similar act evidence, let's go.
Was found nude, lying on her back, concealed under a tree.
Margaret, also found nude, other than her socks, also lying on her back, also concealed under a tree. Next.
Police found clothing, footwear, her black leather purse, and other contents scattered around the body and in the area.
In Margaret's attack, her personal belongings, other than her headphones, also found scattered around the body, if not so erratically, circumscribing the body, as we say. Next.
Neck area bruised, eyes swollen and blackened.
Likewise, in Margaret's case, severe beating to the face and head, both eyes also blackened.
Post-mortem examination, a ruptured liver, larynx, and extensive soft tissue damage to the face and the neck.
In Margaret's case, we have severe trauma to the larynx and a ruptured liver as well, from about 10 to 15 blows to the abdomen. There's little question we're looking at the same signature, and by extension, the same killer. After weeks worth of analysis and investigation, and quite frankly, running into dead ends, the squad, in their efforts to come up with new leads in the murder of Margaret McWilliam, finally have a name as our first person of interest. I'm about to consult with Dr. Eric Hickey, arguably the world authority on serial homicide and sexual violence. He's been a gunslinger in helping take down serial killers with the FBI for over 30 years. How stable as MO and signature do you think there is between the 1987 attack, the 1992 attack?
The fact that she resembled the previous victim, the same location, it strikes me that this man was comfortable going to that park. He knew what he was doing, and he would go through that same pattern of sexual assault.
Out of 10 in terms of points of connection, this likely being the same suspect, what do your instincts tell you?
On a 10 being a perfect match, an 8.
8 out of 10.
8, which would be, for me, like a home run. People who are serial killers can go on for many, many years. He didn't get therapy in prison. He didn't get corrected in prison. So I think you've got something to be quite concerned about.
All right, time's up. The evidence uncovered over the last few weeks has provided some compelling information. All of it strongly suggests the involvement of in Margaret's murder. I'd just like to go around the table, and some people had some outstanding action items that I think we should discuss. Renee.
Through a police contact, I was able to establish that there is still a banker's box full of evidence from Margaret's case, which means that there is the potential that with modern technology, we can access biological material, DNA in particular, from that evidence. There could be a way to link the suspect concretely to Margaret's case.
You may not look it, but I've been a copper for a while, and when I started, you needed a pool of blood. Today, it's handling something. Skin cells, sweat, that's enough. One outstanding item during the course of our investigation that was never really firmed up and nagged at me was this composite drawing developed with the assistance of citizens early on in the investigation. This is a published image following his conviction for the murder. I want you to compare these two images. The ear, hairline, facial hair, lips, eyes, eyebrows, head shape, everything seems consistent other than the ethnicity. We know that eyewitness accounts are inscribed with existing prejudices, biases, suppositions, presumptions. Could it be that the eyewitness got it right? To me, this resonates. I think at this point, we have enough to present our findings to Margaret's family.
How are you?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, too.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
One of our early objectives was to look at Margaret's case in the context of other crimes. We uncovered evidence of the sexual assault and murder of in Warden Woods Park. And there are a number of striking, compelling similarities, not only in MO, but in the signature. There are a number of compelling facts that suggest, in total, in aggregate, that may be responsible for Margaret's murder.
He was convicted of the murder of
That's right.
so he's in jail.
He's been paroled.
It's a day that I thought would never arrive. I just don't know how to feel about it. You know?
I've never met people that are more courageous than the two of you.
We were talking about submitting our report to the police and persuading them to reopen this file. That as of today, they've reopened it.
Oh, good, good. That's a relief.
The detective who's taken this on has left his contact information, and he wants to hear from you.
That's really good news, Mike. So
that is
thank you.
outstanding
Thank
news.
you.
I'm so happy.
Yeah,
So
good.
quickly.
If you have information about this case, go to ownca.oprah.com/tocatchakiller.